to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California. I'm Michelle Miao, a member of the Board of Governors, and we welcome you to this special program that is focused on youths and mental health during Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you to Blue Shield Blue Sky for being a great partner of ours, and thank you to Boys and Girls Club of San Leandro and also Lyric for supporting this program. If you have questions, I'm going to leave question cards for y'all who are here in person for our panel. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce to y'all Paula Ambrose, who is with Blue Shield Blue Sky. Paula, welcome to the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to the Commonwealth Club for hosting these sometimes difficult, often difficult conversations that bring us together to seek truth. As Michelle said, I'm Paula Ambrose, and for the last 16 years, I have been honored to be able to do work that services children and youth. I'm even more grateful to be able to continue in that service at Blue Shield of California, a nonprofit health plan that is striving to create a healthcare system that's worthy of our family and friends and sustainably affordable. In my role at Blue Shield, I lead our Blue Sky Youth Mental Health Initiative. Launched in 2019, Blue Sky has been dedicated to helping increase access, awareness, and advocacy for youth mental health resources and supports. We've been privileged to work with leading nonprofits who are doing everything from helping to expand the definition of provider to include skilled people from our own communities, and literally training the next generation of diverse healthcare mental health providers. Because we know that sometimes it helps to have someone caring for you who may have shared your lived experience, understands your language and maybe your cultural traditions. We've also been honored to partner with folks who are literally equipping young people to be advocates for the resources that they need, including taking them up to the Capitol to speak with legislators about what matters most to them. Through Blue Sky, we've been able to serve over 25,000 young people and caring adults. And while I'm proud of the numbers that we've been able to serve, I'm even prouder of the impact that we've been able to have through Blue Sky. But don't take my word for it. I'm going to invite you to watch a video with some young people and educators talking about the work, featuring one of our phenomenal partners, Wellness Together. Video, please.
For youth is stress in general. There's a lot of expectations to be living up to. There's a lot of concerns to be thinking about at any given time. And so I think it's definitely a widespread sense of anxiety and depression that youth are facing.
California continues to have a shortage of mental health counselors. In fact, on average, there's about one counselor for every 500 students. Young people need and deserve the support. Their school communities want to help them and provide those supports, but they just aren't equipped to do it in the way that they would like to. We wanted to increase awareness so that folks knew what mental health was about, and as a way of reducing the stigma and encouraging young people to seek help when they need it.
I think having the Wellness Together resources on our secondary campuses has been really a game changer.
I feel better when I could just let out to someone I trust. I feel like we could talk about anything to the counselors. I think that's pretty great. So to have multiple options and outlets at the school and knowing that it's private and nobody will know about it is it's pretty special.
We've seen thousands, yes, literally thousands of students' lives changed as a result. That again, may not have had a chance to access mental health services had it not been for the Blue Sky Initiative.
The folks that you bring on campus understand that, we have 38 languages in San Leandro. We're mostly Black and brown. Many of us are coming from families who are working extra to make things happen, and that we're bringing the kinds of counselors and services that are relatable.
It's very important. I feel like it should be everywhere in every school. Because, different students deal with different things.
We're trying to build mental health for not just when you're feeling bad, but also just as a form of taking care of yourself, your mind and body. So we're thankful to have folks who help us do that. It's a good thing when educators can feel more optimistic about providing mental health, and that we're not just doing it from a place of intervention or, in a reactionary way, but that we're getting excited about it because we know that there's a lot more we can do.
Just being willing to listen and accepting the struggles that they're telling you is enough for you to feel validated in those emotions and feel like there's someone there who cares to help.
Yes. And I just want to shout out that some of our Wellness Together partners are here in the room, so just happy to see you. So again, I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish together, emphasis on the together. And I know that mental wellness is still a challenge for our young people, and that breaks my heart. So with that, I'm going to step back so that you can hear from the voices that really matter this evening, our outstanding panelists who will be helping us to learn. I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here to listen and learn from our outstanding panelists, and I'm so grateful that they are leading the way. Thank you.
Let's welcome Zach Gottlieb of Talk with Zach and our esteemed speakers to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. And thanks for the introduction. Glad to be here. And I appreciate the intro. So I'm Zach Gottlieb. I'm a freshman at Stanford. And we have 2 high school students, 2 young adults, and me in college. So we're kind of all over the place, which I think is great. So without further ado, I want to introduce our lovely panel right here. So first, we have, on the far end, Brianna Best, who's a 17-year-old. Yeah, I love the enthusiasm. Brianna Best, a 17-year-old San Leandro youth leader and mental health advocate who is a digital media intern at the Best Buy Teen Center. Up next, we have Claire Armstrong, who is a 16-year-old sophomore and an advocate for mental health, who's on the Sacramento County Behavioral Health Youth Advisory Board. Thanks for joining us. Up next, Mav Lee, who is a perpetual learner, currently focused on healing and exploring new hobbies, and was previously a quant trader who graduated from Harvard. And last but not least, we have serial entrepreneur Anjali Menon, who is the founder and CEO of TBH, which is a venture-backed mental health startup. So thank you all for joining me today, and let's get into the panel. So to start off, it's May, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, which is super important, and it's something that I think a lot of people, this month is a time to focus on wellness, because I feel like we really push it aside and we don't really focus on our psychological needs as much as our physical health. So to start off, I'd love to hear from each of you. Why is it so important to have conversations about mental health, especially in today's landscape? So I'd love to just start with you.
Yeah, well, you know, I got into this work because I think mental health is the most important thing we could be working on in our lifetimes. It's, you know, I think Harvard actually just came out with a study that said half of the world's population will end up with a mental health issue. And, you know, and there's so many statistics out there, but the going one is 1 in 5 kids will have a diagnosable mental health issue. So just by the numbers, this is a massive issue. And I think anybody, you know, here would say they know somebody who has had a mental health issue or they themselves have gone through things. So to me, this is the most impactful thing that we can be working on as a society.
Amazing, yeah. That study is quite a statistic. And from my personal experience, I found that despite accolades or achievements like getting into college or getting a good job, I still have many friends who on the outside appear very successful, but are battling, you know, demons inside and may not have taken time to really fix themselves or take space to just talk it out with someone who could understand, because there's a disconnect between their outside life and inside life. So I think it's very important to, especially for the highest achievers who we might think have it all together, that actually don't.
Yeah, I think something that's really important or something that's important to focus on is the stigma. There's such a big stigma around mental health that I think is important to break that down and kind of foster that community and that idea of like, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to, you know, it's okay to have those. I mean, just that statistic shows that, you know, you're not ever going to not know someone who's had a mental health issue. So I think it's kind of important for people to learn how to have those conversations and kind of say like, oh, like, you know, I have this, and say, oh, you do too. And so I think that's something that personally, like, I've wanted to like help and bring, and that's, you know, my kind of focus right now.
Okay. I feel like mental health is important to speak on because when going through things that really bring you down, it really takes a toll on your character. And, you know, people seeing you in your lowest really makes you look like you don't really care. And I'm only going off experience because I know, like, in the lowest time of my life, I looked like I didn't care about anybody. And you know, I just feel like being able to express yourself, especially to somebody who understands where you're coming from, is like one of the best ways to really express yourself while going through things mentally, because they can connect with you and give you the advice that you need. It probably won't help in that moment, but it will give you the strength to realize that it's okay to live and give yourself time to, you know, get out of the phase of being, you know, in that deep, dark hole that you feel like you're stuck in, knowing that you can get out and be better than what you came in as, which was somebody who was depressed and stuck. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, that's quite the statistic. And as to what you were saying, like stigma, that's a big thing, especially with what I'm doing at Talk with Zach, which is, I think mental health is something that a lot of people have an experience, but it's something that's hidden. We don't really talk about it. It's not really apparent. And I think especially right now, like there's so much uncertainty in our world, and there's a lot of volatility that we've never really seen before. How do you all see these factors affecting mental health, especially for young people?
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay. Wait, can you just rephrase the question just a little bit? Like,
yeah, sure, and anyone can jump in, but I'm just curious, like, we live in such, you know, uncertain times, and I'm just curious what you all think about how the time we're living in right now affects mental health, on top of what people usually struggle with.
Oh, okay, I got you. I feel like now in this time, there was a lot of people from the past, like, you know, people who take care of the young people now that haven't got over the trauma that they've been through as they were younger. And so they tend to reflect themselves onto the younger people, expecting to see better through them what they couldn't see through themselves. And so I feel like, you know, it just affects them a lot. And then that really takes a toll on the younger people, because it's like, you're expecting me to live your life, but I'm trying to live a better life for myself, you know? And it's taken a lot for people to understand that people are trying to get better. And there's a lot of people just reflecting or like, you know, on other people.
I think we're living through truly unprecedented times, and when, you know, a lot of older generations try to understand, I think it can be challenging at times because there is a barrier. And I know, Mav, you talk a lot about intergenerational trauma, and I think a lot of that is related and exacerbated by what's going on in the world today. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think intergenerational trauma is something that happens a lot. I think from my experience from immigrant families where, we read through history, I think it's a really important class for peers to be able to understand the countries or situations that people's parents or grandparents lived through. We're not really far removed from revolutions or wars that happened, and it's like some of my friends' parents or my parents' grandparents lived through those times, and it's not until you begin to unpack the trauma that they experienced in those time periods will, I think, mental health care providers be able to provide adequate care for students that perhaps, are now immigrated and grew up in the U.S., but still have, their past from their family that I think is very much like lived experience in them today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that. And a lot of you too are interested in the intersection of, education and mental health. And one thing that I've noticed is it's not taught in schools. Like we don't really learn these skills, and there's no way for us to become emotionally mature and emotionally fluent if we're not getting this from either our households or our education. So, we have two high school students right here, and you're both very involved, in the youth world. So I'd love to hear from both of you what kinds of advocacy you're doing and how you're leading these conversations.
I can start. So right now, I'm a part of the Sacramento County Behavioral Health Youth Advisory Board. And what we're doing right now, specifically me and a couple of my colleagues, is that we're working on this listening session. And we had done one before in the past that I was a little bit less a part of. But what's going to happen is we're going to have youth ages 14 to 24 come in and talk about just like mental health. And we're kind of focusing a little bit more on suicide. And we kind of just want to see things that they want to see from like the county officials and things, just how they're feeling. It's just a space that we wanted to cultivate where they can come and talk about it with people their age. And so that's what we're working right now. And we want to like create that space where people can talk about it. As far as like with Mind Out Loud, they do a lot of things with like little workshops and stuff that are free that students can come and learn about, like, just different things in the mental health world, different coping strategies or resources and whatnot. That's kind of a little bit of what I'm involved in.
Well, right now I'm not really in any fundraisers or anything, but I do something for school. I go to Eden Area ROP where I do child development, and I kind of do it because I just want to see how children's brains work, why they think the way they do, especially at the age they are right now. And, just being young and how they think. And a lot of them talk about certain things that you wouldn't expect them to say as, they get older. And it just made me realize, a lot of them are going through things that, they don't speak about. So I kind of started listening podcasts and things that have to do with mental health, but really try to focus on kids, because that's where it starts as you grow up, So, yeah.
Yeah, and Anjali, you have a different perspective, which is you're the founder of TBH, which I introduced. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about it. And I know that you do a lot with underserved populations, and particularly with young people in school. So I'd love to hear more about that from your perspective.
Yeah, so from our perspective, we're a bit on the other side of things, as you said, where we actually support schools with virtual mental health solutions, and we sort of expand the offering of therapists and whatnot for school campuses. And I think the school thing is interesting because schools have the potential to be an effective and scalable way to really identify young students up front who might need proactive mental health solutions, and then to sort of kind of continue to be the backdoor channel in terms of continuing care. And a lot of people have made a lot of bets on this. Like, of course, I'm coming from this from the technology side, but like big venture capital companies like Menlo Ventures, things like that, they have literally put out theses around mental health being sort of quote unquote solved through schools as the place where this can happen. I think the complexity around this is students have to trust schools and they have to trust the ecosystem that you build around it. So I think there's an opportunity, but I think there is so much around building trust that is really important to get that ecosystem right.
So you're a technologist, and I think you have a very unique perspective on this because, you know, I think when we talk about trust, there's so many tech mental health startups nowadays, and I'm curious how people are reacting to that versus more traditional, you know, human-to-human connection. Because on the one hand, I could see people trusting technology more because they're not confiding in other people, which takes away a lot of the stress. But at the same time, it's like you may be missing out on that
Totally.
human connection. Yeah.
It's a really good point. And actually, we've heard from a lot of students who use our services that it actually feels safer to cry behind a screen. You know, you can actually like turn your video off and like grab a tissue, for example, whereas, you know, that might not feel so safe in person. This isn't, of course, the experience across the board, but it's certainly something we've heard. And to go back to your earlier point about sort of like underserved communities or non-traditional communities, I think one thing that's also interesting is people tend to think mental health is very, it's sort of like one size fits all. Like you either start with therapy or nothing at all. Yeah. And one of the things that we saw with some of these non-traditional communities was that maybe not shoving therapy as the first line of defense for folks was, you know, maybe something that we could consider. So one of the things we built was something called Listen In. And Listen In is the ability to hear recorded therapy sessions in an anonymized manner. So I could go in and I could say, you know, I'm a certain identity type, and here's the issue I'm having. And I can listen in almost like a podcast. And I can kind of go, oh, like that's what therapy is like. Now I want to go find that provider. I want to go find that therapist. And so I think just getting more creative about how we introduce students across the mental health spectrum to different kinds of services will go a long way in decreasing that stigma.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting, especially about therapy, is it's not just like, you know, you take your morning pill every day. It's a very interactive space. And a lot of people will kind of like dislike therapy at first, and I think a lot of the time it's because they didn't have a good experience and they just didn't click with whoever it was. So I think listening in is a great way because it kind of shows you, well, what kinds of therapists, what kinds of conversations, how to utilize the space. So I think it's just as important to teach people how to use these resources. Something else, you know, and I want to get to you, Mav, too, about this, because you graduated from Harvard early, and a lot of that was because of mental health, and you were surrounded by high achievers. You were kind of at the pinnacle of that, the center of all the valedictorians, right? So I'm very curious to hear your perspective on that and how being surrounded by people who want to succeed so badly affects mental health.
Yeah, so I think a statistic I remember from email was that a third of Harvard students report feeling depressive symptoms, which is a pretty startling statistic amidst the you know, perfect resumes and LinkedIn profiles. And in college was, you know, when I first started seeking mental health care. I think if I had, you know, your startup in high school, I would have used it. So I'm really grateful that you're doing that work. I think anonymity is extremely important. Students are, especially the higher achievers, there's a lot of perhaps like shame associated with seeking help. They don't want to see themselves as weak or having things they need to go through, and it's almost like it's pushed down. You know, we'll finish this homework assignment, we'll get into a good college and then worry about it later. Or perhaps something I kind of fell into is like, achieving this goal will actually solve mental health problems or getting to some achievement. But yeah, in college, seeking care is a very interesting process. We had, I think, like a 3 to 6 month wait for therapists because so many people were reported to be struggling. And the thing about college is the care also is perhaps more short-term, focused on making sure you're actually staying alive, is really the harsh truth. And for more long-term care, I think that transition needs to be better, especially as you're away from home. You're navigating a lot of personal, professional transitions, figuring out who you are. And I would suggest parents being supportive of students who want to take a gap year or two, to slow things down a bit, really figure things out. I find that taking time is really one of the best things one can do to not feel like they're having to battle like personal mental health struggles while, let's say, maintaining their grades or finding a job and these sorts of things. Yeah.
I think when a lot of, very successful people, high-achieving people speak out about mental health, what tends to happen is people say, well, you go to a prestigious school, you have a high-paying job, you can't possibly be struggling. And I think there's this disconnect between external achievement and, emotional well-being that's very internal. So, I'm curious, how each of you have noticed that, and you have such successful people right here. How do you balance, sharing how you feel and also straddling the fact that you are doing amazing things?
Okay, I'll go first. Well, I'm a very open person, so I don't think it was really hard for me to, express myself. I think it was more to certain situations where it was kind of I'm just going to be quiet because it was just going to hurt me more. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just very open. I speak up about how I feel. I know for some people it's hard because they don't feel like, their voice is important, but I think mine is important. So I just speak up a lot. But yeah.
Can you repeat the question one more time? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I think there's this disconnect between people who are very high achieving and have a lot going on the outside, and then also kind of balancing, your internal wellness. So I'm curious how you've noticed that for you and then also the people around you.
Yeah. I'm the kind of person that I just like to go. I don't like to take a break and sit down, but I think sometimes it's important to recognize that myself. I'm also very different from you where I don't like to say okay, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. I don't like to say that, but I think it's just important, what you said, to learn to take a break and learn your limits. And so it's just something that not everybody does naturally, but I've definitely had to learn okay, maybe don't do that because that's another added thing on top of that. So yeah.
For me, it's, I remember in high school, a friend of mine, on the outside, she had, she was a sports captain and, ended up being valedictorian of our school. And we both went to Harvard together. And I think, I was a close friend, but everyone else sort of saw the perfect veneer, and I'm sure all of you guys have someone in mind, perhaps from school, who's they have it all together. They're in shape. They have the grades. They have a career or a good relationship. Seems like they have it all together, but the truth is no one has it all together. And I think it's this idea, especially people who on the extreme side seem to have it all together. They're the most worried about letting something slip and worried what people will say or judge, or whether a lot of the admiration or love felt by society, community, parents was conditional. And I think this idea that, wow, like if I reveal my true self, will I still receive the same love and admiration? There's a deep-seated fear behind people who go to the extremes of having it all together. And so then it can feel very lonely because, again, they are kind of at this extreme end. I think teachers, when they look at students with mental health struggles, they often look at, let's say, people who aren't doing well in school, but perhaps it's best viewed as like if you're on either extreme end, like you have the perfect grades, then perhaps there's something behind that as well that could be looked into.
Yeah. I would just say on that point, what we fear, to your point of fear, is often what we hate. Mm-hmm. And there can't be love in that scenario. And so learning to really love all aspects of yourself, it's a very long journey of doing that. And I think that's really what you're talking about.
I think at the core of this too, great, thanks so much. I think at the core of this too is creating the spaces, to really talk and to be vulnerable, because I think that's one of the hardest things. And Brianna, you want to be a child psychologist, right?
I do.
And a lot of what you emphasize is creating those self-affirming spaces. So I'd love to hear what that looks like for you and how you intend to create that.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to speak from my point of view of when I do work with children. Mm-hmm. I've noticed, in the beginning when I first started, I wasn't really trusted. Going back on, when you guys were talking about, having that trusted open space and stuff, the kids didn't really trust me at first. They were just getting to know me, realizing that I was a high schooler. They just thought I knew everything and stuff. And then I kind of got into it, and they started opening up to me about, certain things they went through. Not really personal, but, just more things that happened, at school or, at home. But it's funny to them. But to me, it just, it wouldn't sit right with me. And so I try to let them know in the most, positive way possible, not trying to make it, a dull moment for them. That, that's not okay that that's happening to you, and you need to build up the courage to speak up about it. You don't have to speak up about it, but giving them the courage to let them know it's okay to speak up when you feel uncomfortable in a situation or something is going on, and I think that gave them that trusted space to understand where I knew where they were coming from. Kid or not, I could have been an adult, I still would have understood because I know where they're coming from, because there's just certain things that you don't really speak about. But I also wanted to get into why they think the way they do, really, and why they act the way they do. Because, at one point we were all kids and we made decisions in our life or things happened to us that, affect us. And so as I got older, like me now, being 17 years old, I've gotten a realization of myself that, it's okay to conversate with yourself as well. Have conversations with yourself, reassure yourself, you're good. There's nothing wrong. Before I got on this stage, I was going crazy. And then I let myself know that, you're going to be all right and you've been through this already. And now you're helping other people understand that it's okay to speak out about things that you're going through, or just free your mind of certain things that are taking deep tolls on you or messing with your head. So, yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. We did actually have some affirmations going on right before we walked out. So I appreciate you sharing that. And, Mav, you've also, you're transitioning right now, and you're very grateful for Lyric, which is an organization that supports that. Tell me about how they've supported your journey, because that's also a space that I think, these organizations creating the spaces for people that are transitioning, and I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I think I'm super grateful to Lyric, and they're one of the sponsors here. I think the spaces that I've put myself in, there's usually a dichotomy between, the really ambitious crowd. You're kind of trying to climb some sort of ladder, be it socioeconomic status or anything like that. And that ladder and the nonprofit world or seeking help is very different. I found the higher I was climbing, I went into an industry where I was often the only one that looked like me or had, my queerness was, maybe I could see like one other intern that shared the same identity. So it did feel very, I couldn't bring my full self to work, or there were certain things about my identity I couldn't talk about, or it would be hard for people to understand. And because, there's a focus on achievement, and I realized, people, were interacting with me because of, let's say, the accolades that I may have had, and not necessarily, and what I would say is, like, with gender identity, it's something that I unfortunately, pushed down a bit in college, because Harvard was a very conforming space, as you guys may imagine, and we're all trying to fit in, especially at like a school like that. And while I had, come out in high school a bit, I dated around in college. I was exploring that part. I didn't really feel comfortable. I think I experimented with going by a different name, and there were these conferences like Out for Undergrad, which are these queer tech or business conferences that I went to. It was a great community, but it felt like in school there were so many eyes on you at all times, and I didn't give myself the space to explore that. And I think it's finally after college and after coming to a place like SF where we can finally be our own, I knew this was the right place to be. There are amazing nonprofits like Lyric that I have gone to seek support from, because I knew I needed help figuring these things out. And unfortunately, I do come from a culture where it is very hard. Like, I think generally immigrant cultures value conformity even more. And so the idea of deviating from the norm, something that I think it's really hard for, let's say, family members to process. So yeah, just grateful for spaces like that to be affirming. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing, and then also thanks to our sponsor, Lyric, today. And kind of like going off your last point, Anjali, you just had a recent partnership with Bling Empire, the reality TV show, focusing on bringing awareness to minority mental health. And I'm really curious if you could expand on what unique challenges these groups in particular face.
Yeah, well, the reason we did the Bling Empire thing was we were realizing on campus underserved and underrepresented populations get smushed together all the time. And what was interesting was that the Asian American population, in particular, they were having a hard time finding folks that could identify with that specific population on college campuses. So that's why we made a big push with the Asian American population. And in fact, for anybody here who's interested in that specific population, the Asian American Foundation just released an amazing mental health report that I would direct folks to go to, where they talk about a lot of the issues around, sort of the immigrant experience, expectations, family pressure, and all of that. And a lot of the recommendations were mental health can't just be put in this silo of just the student goes out and seeks help. There's got to be parental sort of involvement as well in some way. One of the interesting facts from that study actually was that of the folks that did not feel comfortable talking to their parents, the reason was because they felt like they would be a burden. And so that's something that I think, thinking about as you develop mental health solutions, who is the end user here? Is it just the student? Is it the student and the family? Is it the student, family, and therapist? And really being intentional about, how you think about designing systems around all the players involved.
Yeah, well, I think it's so fascinating to look at intersectionality with mental health, and I do think it goes beyond the individual into real emotional health literacy. And on that note, we have so many questions right here. I don't know how we're going to get to all of them in the last 15 minutes here, but let's see here. So, okay, first question, did the pandemic change things for you mentally, and if so, how are you coping? I'd love to start with you, Clara, because one of our high school students. You're probably like right in it. So
Yeah. So I was in 5th grade when COVID actually took it down, and actually the California quarantine when Gavin Newsom everything shut down was on my birthday. So I remember very vividly my mom picking me up from school and just being like, what is going on? But it was really interesting because I didn't go to public school, so we didn't have the same. We did go online for a little bit, but we were back in school. But I think it kind of helped, but also slowed down the idea of pushing mental health to be known, because people were kind of like still figuring out online things, but then also gave that platform of learning about it. So it's a very in between kind of space. For me, I really liked being online. I think I feel like I did really good. I don't exactly remember my exact report card, but I feel like I did really good. But I think there was a lot of, especially for juniors and seniors, it was that was their year and they didn't get to experience that. I think there was a lot of disappointment around that. But I don't think I specifically had any really suffered from it mentally. I definitely missed my friends, but yeah, I think that was kind of my point of view on that.
Great.
Yeah. When COVID hit, my life went downhill from there. I was in the 6th grade, and I was actually already going through something. I was already going through bullying and stuff, but it didn't really affect me as much as everybody else, because the people that were doing it to me, they were my friends. Or at the time, they were my friends. But it was just a lot going on, a lot in my home life. Online school was not easy for me at all. That was actually when I discovered that I had a learning disability, and that really took a toll on me because I just felt less than others. So for me, it was depression kind of hit me. I had did a big move. I was living in San Leandro, and then I moved all the way to Pleasanton. It was just a lot. It was a separation going on. So I think for me, COVID really brought me to the person I've escaped from today, because at the time I was just so low, and I didn't really have an open mind to want to do anything. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to learn. I didn't want to really talk to anybody. So for me, it just took me down. But yeah.
Yeah. And Mav, were you in college? Were you?
Yeah, so
okay.
that hit my senior year of high school. So unfortunately, I was had the virtual graduation and prom and all that.
That's the worst.
And in freshman year, well, what I do remember is I had bottled up. I remember second semester senior year will be the really fun semester. It'll be after college apps. I'll finally get to have fun. So I think what goes to show there is having a healthy work-life balance. And in high school, I was kind of a machine, which a lot of people are, to get into these schools. And what I remember, I was 16, I told my parents, hey, I would really like to get a therapist. But unfortunately, I think what you guys mentioned about the mental health care being holistic, involving parents, is so crucial, because it doesn't really matter if they're getting care in school. If the moment they go home, it's a bit of a different story. And for students or kids, their parents are still the number one resource they listen to. And so what I now know is that I also had a learning disability. I had ADHD, but I was masking it with a bit of anxiety as well, getting all my assignments in. But I didn't have healthy coping mechanisms, and it's something I've only figured out, let's say in college, when my grades started slipping a bit, or I wasn't achieving or being my best self, or I knew I could do better, and so I think that's, I think I talked about this with another high school friend who I remember they took some time off their junior, senior year to go to the local hospital, and they were able to sort out her ADHD. And I realized, I think a lot of times we were all oh, where did they go? Are they okay? But really, yeah, figuring these things out early is quite important, because then, as an adult, you're expected to have to be an adult, to know how to cope, to have certain life skills, and I think, yeah, while you're a student or when you're younger, it's a lot easier to seek help, and the consequences are less dire when, you do have mental health struggles. Yeah.
Going off this, our next question is about adults, which is what's something that adults get wrong about mental health? And yeah, so if you want to start or someone else wants to jump in, I think this is a really great question.
I think that this is something we actually did a survey on this. I think one thing that we found was that like a lot of adults thought that they were someone's trusted adult. And so I think like they didn't understand why maybe they're, maybe not their son or their daughter, but just a child they were close to, like couldn't open up to them. Because we found like a lot of kids, like they're in the survey, one of the questions was, do adults around you like want you to open up to them? And they would say yes, but then they'd say, oh, but I don't, they're not, that one's not a trusted adult, or yes, but I don't know how to. So I think it was something of like, maybe a lot of adults don't realize like maybe not every child like knows how to open up to you or something. And I know it's kind of like a complicated way of saying it, but it's just like not every, young person knows how to, open up to certain people.
Absolutely, and that's something that I've actually spoken a lot about, which is a lot of parents will come to me and be like, I keep asking my child to open up, and they're not opening up.
Yeah.
And what I find out is that they're actually kind of like berating their child almost, instead of, creating the space where their kid feels open to come to them, where they won't be judged. Because a lot of the time it's like, yeah, like come to me if something happens. You might be grounded, but still come to me. And I'm like, you really need to create the space where they actually want to come to you and talk to you like an adult and have that conversation. So yeah. I really like that.
One thing we've seen at universities is administrators, when you ask them what's the number one like mental health issue for students, like this survey ran and like administrators kind of conclusively said, oh, it's social media. Social media is bad for students. And when you ask students the same thing in the survey, it was actually like, oh, academic pressure, financial issues, all sorts of like other things. So there's just this big discrepancy between sort of like what the powers that be at schools think and sort of what students believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think there's definitely that gap. Adults are very quick to say it's all the phones, it's all social media, which I think has a lot of merit, and that can be true. But yeah, it's a lot in addition to that.
Yeah, and only after, I wish I knew this as a kid, but now that I'm supposedly, an adult now, but I realize adults don't really know what they're doing either. Like, we're all kind of figuring things out. As a kid, we looked at our parents as like almost godlike figures who knew everything. But, if you're first-time parents, you also are figuring things out. And sometimes you might actually, even though you love your child, that doesn't mean, whoa, it's a big concept, but that doesn't mean you necessarily parented well. And so even though you mean well, your execution could, have been not great. And it's not really, I think it comes back to intergenerational trauma a bit, because it's not necessarily the parents' fault either, because then their parents also went through things, and it could be culture. Different cultures express emotions differently and have different views regarding mental health. And so I think it's realizing that, okay, you care the most about your child, but that sometimes means letting them go to seek care from, a better source, or be parented in a way by, let's say, like teachers or friends. Or I think parenting doesn't happen from just the parents. It happens from every aspect of society, is how the child grows up. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna keep it nice and short because I agree with you guys. I just really feel like, I agree. Like, I think adults miss the concept of, creating that safe space, giving people, or like giving the child or adult the opportunity to realize, they're here to listen before they judge. Because I have a relationship like that with my mom, where she listens before she judges. So, and I know a lot of people don't have that with any parent at all. So,
Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next question. I really like this one. How do you all check in with your friends, and what are some signs that you could help a friend in need?
Yeah.
Can I go first?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how I check in on my friends, I'm very observant. So I'm really able, plus I've known my friends for a very long time. They haven't switched for the longest. So for me, it's really easy for me to tell when something's wrong with them. And I kind of give them the opportunity to come to me and open up. And then if they don't, that's when I'll go to them and ask them what's the matter with them or what's wrong. But I'll only ask once because I don't want them to feel pressured by me. I just want them to understand that, I'm here to listen and I'm here to give advice if needed. Also, what was the second part of the question? Or was it like?
Yeah, just like, what are some signs that you could help a friend?
Oh, okay.
Sounds like you're very perceptive, though.
Yeah. I don't know. I would just say, I'm always open to listen. I mean, me and my friends are very open. So they're open to talk to me. They're comfortable enough to talk to me and take my advice and use it. So, yeah. Yeah.
I think that checking on my friends is something I'm probably really bad at. I'm especially at school, me and my friends, we just mess around so much. But there has been times where I've texted my friend and say, hey, are you okay? Something's a little off. And usually, you don't get much of a response, but sometimes you do. And, there's been times where I'm like, oh, okay, you're not okay. And so then you're just there to listen and make sure, that they are okay. But there's not always a lot you can do. Kind of what she said, asking just once, because sometimes they don't really want to say anything. And so I think it's just important, not pressuring them to tell you what's wrong. I think that's something that's important.
Something that I've only recently realized from interacting with a friend's parent who has been taken the listen before judging approach is sometimes you actually have to take care of yourself first before taking care of others. I think there are some times when people overgive. Let's say, what's the quote? You're burning yourself or something to keep the fire warm. So I'm messing it up, but something like that. And yeah, I think that's actually something that I think Asian cultures tend to be more collectivist, where it's really about the group versus the individual. This idea that there's a concept of self, and almost like you taking care of yourself is removing a worry from your friends as well, is something that I think is really cool. But yeah, checking in, I think, generally during times of, let's say, a big exam or, a friend's going through something. I think even having friends, after college, I realized you can have friends that are in a different life stage in your life. I found, friends that are still in college or much older than me to have the time and energy to, let's say, interact with me in a way where, if you're around friends that are new out of college, everyone's going through the same struggles, you're tired of hearing the same thing over and over. And actually, everyone's struggling with the same thing, and no one knows how to solve it. So you're almost kind of dumping on each other, and it's not helpful. Yeah. So I think, seeking diversity in your friendships is incredibly important.
That's cool.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with this, and I think it is one of the hardest things to check in with your friends. I think so many times we're talking about, what we're doing, what we're up to, and not really how we're feeling. And when people do ask, oh, how are you? I'm like, yeah, good. Just keep it casual. But really, checking in with people is crucial, and it's something that, I wish we could do more of. But just creating that space, I think, Brianna, you really touched on that, making sure that your friends know that they could come to you if needed.
Yeah,
I really like that. I want to end on this last question here. Let's do a speed round. I see we're really running out of time, but if there's one piece of advice you could give to someone who's struggling with their mental health, what would it be? Let's do a speed round. And we'll start with you.
I would say, remember to always keep a smile on your face and always build yourself up and never let yourself down, regardless of whoever or whatever breaks you down, because you are your future and nobody else. Yeah. So don't forget. Clock that T.
Oh, period. I think one thing is like you're gonna be okay. Like at the end of the day, like it's always gonna like work out. Like that's just how it works. And I think also find someone that you can reach out to if you need that. Like make sure you have at least one relationship that's like that. That if you need just talk to someone, you can. I think that's important.
For me, it's time heals all. Even though you might be going through your first breakup, have teenage angst, when you're like 18, 20 years old, you can't imagine what it would mean to live to 80. That the concept of time is, you feel like this emotion or pain will last forever, but it won't last forever. And I think just making sure you're reminding yourself of that. Yeah.
Mary Oliver has this great set of poems, and in one of them, she talks about the ability to find ways to always love the world. And I think that, like, if you can continue to find ways, no matter how much life throws things at you, find ways to love the world.
That's cool. I like that.
Love that. Great. Well, that's all the time we have. We have so many more questions I wish we could have got to. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. This was a phenomenal panel, and panelists, let's give a hand to our panelists.